I'm David Glenn Taylor, and this is the Voyagers Podcast. How you doing? Mentally, emotionally. Had any good arguments on Facebook lately? Did politics come up? Yeah, I know. We all know. Social media is a crazy place to be right now, and politics, it might as well be a four-letter word. You don't know this about me, but I used to be very involved in politics. I worked on quite a few campaigns when I lived in Alaska, usually helping to design and craft political messaging for advertising and brand presentation of the candidate. And I loved it. And I thought about why, and this is it. Nearly every candidate I worked with was running for the right reasons. Contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of political candidates are hardworking, highly intelligent people who care deeply about their communities. I can see you shaking your head, but it really is true. And I was just excited working in that space. It was so positive and full of possibility to make things better. So here's what inspired this episode. I have a friend who served as a U.S. Senator for Alaska named Mark Begich, and I had scheduled an interview with him, and it just happened to be the day after the first presidential debate, the one we all witnessed a few weeks ago it just sucked, didn't it? No matter who you were rooting for, it was just frustrating to witness as an American. But my friend Mark, he's one of the more optimistic guys that you will ever meet, so I was excited to talk to him and get his take on that debate, on the state of our politics and the Constitution. And Mark, to his credit, makes a good case for why we should all be excited about the future, why we should all get involved with politics on some level, and why we should leave our despair at the door. You're a former U.S. Senator. You've been in those rooms when there's no cameras and there's no people talking, So let's get into just a little bit how you got into politics, what the appeal is for you, like why you enjoy it.
I got into politics, really kind of general public policy, because I believe that you can complain about a lot of things, but if you don't get engaged, you're not doing anything.
Right.
I mean, you can talk about the problems, you can have great ideas or even marginal ideas, but if you don't get engaged with the political process in some way, maybe as someone who's an advocate on an issue or in elected office, then you don't really have a lot of space to complain. So, and also I've been in business almost all my life, and it's been good to me. My community's been good to me, and I thought, why not give back? And so serving in many different areas, from working with folks who were elected to serving as an Anchorage Assembly member, a mayor, and a U.S. Senator, and run for governor. And now, most recently, oddly enough, advising the current governor, who I lost against, on economic recovery because of COVID. I think it's important that people do get engaged. A lot of our business that we do is around that part of the equation, meaning that we do projects and work that has a impact to the community that we work in, live in, or have relationships in, because we think it's important that, when you do business, it's not just for the economic value, but it also has a change element, you might say, or an improvement element to the community you live in. So I think it's a great way to participate in. One voice, one vote can make a difference in the direction of a city or a state or a country.
Do you get exasperated when you see people that are just complain, but don't get involved, don't get into a campaign?
I don't necessarily get exasperated. What I get is I just let them, you've known me, I'm pretty direct. I don't like to dilly-dally around, and I tell people directly when they start complaining, and I say, well, what are you going to do about it? Right. And when they say, well, blah, they have some excuse, I just look at them and say, that's an excuse for your ability just to complain. Right. I said, if you don't get engaged, and honestly, I have limited time for the conversation, because even if it means that you're getting engaged by supporting someone who supports your issues, that's great. That's great. It's better than just sitting around complaining. It gets me motivated to some degree, but also it gets me thinking about what I can do to push the envelope on people to see how far they will get. And sometimes they get mad at me and motivates them to get involved, and it's okay. Right. Yeah. That's welcome to the world we live in.
Nice. Can I ask your opinion about the debate last night, about what was that experience? I mean, we all had a kind of a separate experience, and pretty much the kind of everyday citizen was just kind of disgusted by what they saw or whatever. But
I've been in debates, obviously, as a candidate, and I get their situation they're in and the stress level they're under when they go onto those stages, because in some ways, some believe it's a make or break in their elections, and some believe it's just survive and be happy. But what this was a problem. I think this debate was an embarrassment to anyone living in this country or any U.S. citizen, because I think what you saw there was how low can it go? And, I'm a Democrat. I know this will sound partisan, but I do think Trump went beyond. I mean, he's a bully. And I think even the commentator, the moderator from Fox News, keep this in mind. I mean, it wasn't some liberal news outlet. It was Fox News moderating this, or the moderator from Fox News. And many times, especially about halfway in, he almost like had enough with Trump just making faces, interrupting, throwing comments out that were irrelevant. And I think part of being elected office is not only presenting your ideas, but presenting them in a respectful way and being feisty when you need to be, right? You need to push back when you need to, and you need to get it going a little bit. But at the end of the day, people love and hate their elected officials, but they look toward them. Sure. Meaning they look at them and say, what, in a nutshell, you represent us, whoever that person is, as a country. And that's where the care part of the person plays a huge role. And what I saw last night was the lack of that, right. The lack of civility, the lack of respect for each person's views. May we differ, and sometimes differ very harshly, right? Yeah. I mean, it's why I can go on the talk radio here, conservative talk radio, to this day. I did it yesterday, matter of fact. And the respect between me and the host is very high, even though we politically disagree probably 98% of the time. Right. I think what we saw last night was a disgrace and an embarrassment. Actually, I was more embarrassed that we would have that level of debate. And I'm glad some of the new rules might be, and I think they should do this. I've been in debates where the moderator has control of the microphone. And when you start talking too much, or you're doing like they were doing last night, you shut them off, right. I think that will be good. I think it's important, one, both candidates still need to do these debates. People are looking for answers if you're undecided about who's the best candidate. My son summed it up, and I'll just end on this. He said, I called him. He's in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. right now. And I said, what'd you think? And he says it was a disgrace. Now, he's an 18-year-old, and that is the generation we're trying to inspire to think about, because we need more public policymakers over time, because people get old or they lose elections or whatever it might be. Right. And we need people who fill those spots. And we need people who are enthusiastic and believe in the great American dream and what it has and what the possibility has. Yeah.
What does it look like, even when you were a U.S. Senator, when you guys are all, and when you're in front of the cameras, you're presenting your policy positions, you're also presenting why you don't think the opposite side is correct in something, but then you have to go behind doors where there's no microphones and you have to work with those people. What does that look like? I mean, because we see the partisanship like crazy, and there's just this kind of, especially because of social media and the way that it circulates on social media, people saying partisan, partisan, partisan. What does it look like behind scenes?
First off, for me personally, when I served in office, I never took anything personal. In other words, someone may disagree with me and have an emotional, response to that, one of my colleagues, and, that's not my issue. That's their issue. They seem to be emotional in the wrong direction, but that's not for me to correct. Mine is to talk and try to get them to understand where I come from, and also know that I'm not here to do harm. I'm trying to do good things, and at the same time do it in a way that listens to the opposition, hear their ideas. May we still disagree, but have that moment of discussion and opportunity. And I think what you see lots of times in the media in general has perpetuated this problem beyond reality. And why I say that is, do you remember when growing up, you could turn on the news and it wouldn't be 24 hours politics. Mm-hmm. It is now. Mm-hmm. Every major channel is 24 hours politics. There is one channel now I cut into. They have a political channel, but then you find what they call the news of the day. And I just watch that because it's all the other stuff that's going on in this world that I think is more important in many ways of what we should be focused on. So we've hyperventilated this. So then as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, you got to make your score in the public arena because you got to win the election. Then you go behind the scenes. And like you said, this is where I spent a lot of time. I probably in the Senate sponsored, I sponsored stuff from Ted Cruz to Bernie Sanders. I worked with them. And my view was what can we be working together on in order to move this country forward? And you'd have very cordial conversations. You'd have conversation about your families and other things. And I think that is an important part of it. If you're just there doing business, you lose the personal relationship that is critical. I think we don't have that as much anymore. People are just out for blood. And who can they stomp into the ground? And I think that is now bled behind closed doors even more.
Oh, I see.
So it's even harder now for people to have these colleagues former colleagues of mine that are currently serving. I talked to them last night. Matter of fact, talked to several of them. And they tell me it's worse than it was when I was there, which I thought was fairly bad. And that just is because it's people taking it personal and they're grinding it even behind the doors now, or when they're sitting in, the Senate dining room having lunch with each other. And next thing you know, they're not talking to each other because they think, so it's gone bad. It's not the Hatfields and McCoy, but it's bad. I think we got to turn that somehow if we want our country to move forward. What it will take, to be honest with you, in the sense of how this all works, you got to have someone in both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus who will step beyond their leadership of who leads them in that group. In other words, saying to their leader, if it's a Democrat telling Schumer or a Republican telling McConnell in the House side or the Senate side, you're wrong, here's why, and I'm public about it. But they're all afraid of their shadows. And the thing I always used to do, and I used to do this a lot with the leadership in the Democratic Party, I used to always tell them where I thought they were wrong, both publicly and privately. If you look at statistically, and I've been in politics long enough and I've played tournament poker longer, so I'm a poker player. I was just telling someone here in the office, I gave them some money to get some lunch, and they said, I said, oh, wait, let me check. See that money I just gave, make sure the liar's poker numbers aren't any good there. And they looked at me like, what is that? And I said, never mind. But why I'm saying this is because statistically, if you, and I'll give you one real example, if you are a Democrat or a Republican, you go publicly opposing your leadership, the odds of you being kicked out of a leadership position that you might hold or seniority or a committee you're on are about zero. Example, when Lieberman supported the Republican presidential candidate over the Democratic candidate, he did not get kicked out of the Democratic caucus after that candidate lost, McCain. He still stayed in the Democratic leadership and had a committee he chaired. He didn't get kicked out. Most people would think, he's not even supporting the Democratic nominee, and he's in the Democratic caucus. He's supporting, the Republican. He should get kicked out. That didn't happen because the odds are against using it. So people need to have a little more backbone and step up for what's right. And I think they're scared of the shadow because most of these people have only known politics and made their living at politics.
Right.
Which is good and bad. I like people who are knowledgeable, understand what's going on.
Right.
I also want them to have real life experiences. If they don't have that, they don't do you any favor or me any favor, or anything because they don't know what's going on.
Sure. Well, as someone yourself who has gone through some of those transitions coming out of the Senate and then going back into the business world, that's a scary process for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the things that if I'm an individual, I run for office and I get into that space and I go, now I have to somehow pull this off for the next 20 years and I got to stay in office. That fear seems like it would be debilitating in terms of your ability to, stand up for anything.
It does. But it's kind of an interesting thing. When you run for office, you're taking a lot of risks.
Right.
When you get in office, you become risk adverse. Unless, and like in my case, what I made sure was from an economic standpoint, I made sure the public office was not my economic need. In other words, I didn't need the job to pay my bills. And that's hard because you have to be smart, save money, have another income or have investments. And I worked hard. I was 14 years old when I had my first business and worked 3 jobs 1 year just to pay bills. And so I get it, but that gave me the flexibility, and I've won races and I've lost races, but it's given me flexibility to do things. For example, I knew when I voted on the Affordable Care Act, I knew the odds of me winning re-elect 2 years later, or 3 years later, I think it was, were pretty slim. But I knew it was the right thing to do. But I also didn't fear that, oh my God, if I vote for this, I'll lose my job. No, I would lose the ability to serve in that capacity in public policy. I took the risk. I lost my election. I'm still engaged.
Are the founding fathers and the documents more mythological than practical? There's this thing that keeps going on, and the argument, especially right now, you see under the kind of the Trump administration or the Trump way of doing politics, is that there's this constant argument about constitutionalism and that the Constitution is this thing, but it seems like on both sides it's turned into just myth. Because if you really are a reader or a student of history, you start to see that like things were radically different than what is being presented. I mean, what is your view of the Constitution, the documents, the founding fathers, and how this democracy is set up?
Well, I believe in it. I think it works. I think this debate has occurred since the day they signed the Constitution, right? People had different views in order, because it was a document of compromise. So it's not a purist document. There's not a black or white in the sense of what something means all the time. You know, freedom of the press even gets debated, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Can you charge a tax on the sale of a newspaper? Because that may prevent people from purchasing, right? Is that declaring less freedom of the press? What's freedom of speech? You know, all these things, you can kind of go through this list, right, of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And are these documents, like you said, mythical now? I don't think they're mythical. I think they are used for the arguments of either side as they see them. And this has been no different, like I said, since the day these documents were written. The problem is, I think, is what comes into play here is because the inability for Congress to actually legislate broad policy, the courts are now interpreting what the Constitution says. Right. What does it mean in regards to a law? And if you always listen to what happens, you say, well, it's unconstitutional unless Congress does fill in the blank. Then usually Congress doesn't do that. Right. They say it's unconstitutional. Well, no. It's unconstitutional because the way you wrote it doesn't necessarily mean the idea of that law, whatever that law is wrong. It's just how you wrote it created some gaps in the ability for it to be implemented under the court's view, which is the final arbitrator on constitutional issues when it regard to law. You know, it's like the whole thing when you see people, you know, chanting USA, USA, and somehow that's Republicans only. Well, that's BS. That's bullshit. I mean, come on. You know, we're all Americans. We're all here for a variety of reasons. My grandparents on my father's side came over in 1915 from a repressive country and came here to live a new life. You know, that doesn't make my family less American than the person who'd been here since the 1600s, right? So people want to raise the flag or the Constitution in their back pocket. You know, be frank with you, these senators and elected officials who walk around and say, I got the Constitution right here in the breast pocket of my suit. I have it every day. That's just because they don't remember. They got to remind themselves because they tell things that aren't true all the time. And I think that's my view of it. Sure. I mean, the Constitution is a document, but it also wasn't perfect. You know, all men were not created equal under that Constitution, if people remember. Right. It had modified. Women couldn't vote. You know, I think, for example, now that the courts have ruled that corporations are people, which is ridiculous, because if they are, how come I don't see them walking around here? You know? I don't see IBM walking down the street here. Right. So I think that needs a constitutional amendment. Matter of fact, Bernie Sanders and I supported that. No one else would. You know, the right to privacy, which, you know, I think is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in this country. And if you know, Alaska has, I think it's Alaska and Vermont might be the other state, but Alaska has a very strong right to privacy in our Constitution of the state. That is non-debatable. So I think in a lot of ways, they're not totally evolving documents, but they evolve to a certain level based on circumstances and time. You know, women was a great example, the right for women to vote. When the Constitution was written, it was a different time. Slave owners, women had a different place in society based on the men who were in charge. Yeah. Or, you know, the pendulum may go the other way, and someday, who knows, men might be written out of the Constitution.
We can only hope. We can only hope.
The world will be better. You know, there are more women serving now in public office than ever before. More women have signed up to run for office than ever before. This election cycle, my wife and I, and the last election cycle, have predominantly spent our time raising money for women who are running for office. You know, I think the men, and, you know, I'm part of the equation. I don't say I did this, but I think most men who are in office have screwed things up,
Yeah.
And we need to change the deck a little bit here.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that completely.
No?
I look at my wife and she's so much smarter than I am. I would
Well,
trust.
there is something to say, and this is not to sound sexist or anything, but women are a lot more thoughtful. They'll spend more time analyzing. They're more fiscally frugal, I believe, even if they are Democrats or Republicans. That's irrelevant. I think they see things differently, and they're much, at least my view, they see things in the long term, not the short term. I think men are very, tomorrow. What are we doing tomorrow?
Right.
And then you might say, what about next year? Well, yeah, tomorrow. We as society have to think things on a longer term. We have to be more compassionate. It doesn't mean you give up your views or what you stand for.
Right.
But you need to recognize at the end of the day, we all live together in the same. That's why, for example, working with former Governor Sean Parnell, a Republican, and the current governor, Dunleavy, on the economic revitalization for Alaska because of COVID. I didn't see any question about that. I was asked, I said yes. And at the end of the day, I had some Democrats mad at me because somehow I was empowering the Republican governor. My view was I'm trying to help fix the problem of economy crashing.
Right.
And if we don't fix that, no one's empowered. We're all going down.
Right.
So I had some pretty hot debates with some people about that are highly placed and well-recognized Alaska Democrats, and I just did not buy into their argument.
So, kind of existentially speaking, Mark Begich, late at night and dealing with all the stuff that's going on. Do you have hope? Are you hopeful right now in terms of the progress that our country is making, or are you in despair?
I'm not in despair. Matter of fact, I just did an introduction for Senator Coons from Delaware. He was on a phone call that I was on, and we had two people before me, and one said how they were mad about what's going on. And then the next person talked about how they were sad about what was going on. And then it came my turn, and I have to introduce Senator Coons. And I said, well, I'm glad. I'm glad that he's here. I'm glad that people are active. I'm glad that people are motivated. Because if you wake up every morning, to your point, in despair or stressed out because your country's falling apart or you think it is falling apart, you will get paralyzed.
Yeah.
And you will paralyze those around you because your enthusiasm or your lack of enthusiasm spreads depending on who you're talking to or not. And so I'm a believer in what's possible, not what's impossible. When people come into my office here in Anchorage and they're sitting down here and want to meet about something, they don't leave here in despair. They don't leave here depressed. They don't leave here thinking, geez, nothing can happen. They leave here enthusiastic. Give you an example, David. I just did a deal 3 weeks ago, a little over 3 weeks now, buying a hotel in Anchorage and going to renovate it in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, if that isn't optimism, I don't know what is.
Right.
I'm out, and we're still doing a little bit more fundraising on it, but we've raised, several $1 million from Alaskans to invest in this. We have national franchisors, 5 of them now competing to be the flag on the hotel. We have a national hotel management group that's excited about this. Matter of fact, has become an investor in it.
Wow.
So, if I would have told you, knocked on your door, hey, Dave, let's invest in a hotel in the middle of the pandemic. And you might have looked at me, well, I know you would have looked at me like I'm a crazy man. The office building I'm in right now, we bought 2.5 months ago. One down the street has been vacant for 2 years, and we're now in the process of renovating it. And we've already leased it out 85% in a downturn economy.
Right.
So you have to believe in what makes Americans unique compared to any other country. Data will tell you this. Polling data will show you this. We are the most optimistic people in the world, even in these times.
Yeah.
And what people have to always remember, I always tell my team this, there are so many things happening out in the world, but you work in a space like this, accomplish what you can here and build off of that. Yeah. And like I got my space, if my space bumps against your space and your space bumps against another, now the space is bigger. But if you're so focused on, I want to tell Vice President Biden this or President Trump this, well, the odds of you doing that are slim. So why not figure out how you can influence that in your space?
Yeah, man.
Because if everyone did that as a multiplier effect, I really believe this. I mean, I think you've known, again, me long enough. I'm a very optimistic person.
Yeah.
And like I said, buying a hotel and renovating it, and we'll be spending millions to do that in a COVID pandemic in Alaska. Call me crazy. I
Well,
might be at the end of the day.
I'm assuming Alaska hasn't got uglier during this time.
No, as you know, it's a beautiful place. The summer's been fantastic. And I believe that if you believe where we are today will be the way it is, then you bet you should be depressed.
Yeah.
But if you believe it's a moment in time, and that anytime we've had a crisis, I can name you plenty of them, multiple recessions we've had over the last 3 decades, or everything from, go back to my decade of being born, the Vietnam War. We've had the Nixon crisis with almost full impeachment. We had, a crashing economy under Carter. We had a great recession under Bush and then Obama. And now we have this. When you take all these moments in time, even before that, we've always come through it and always gotten better after the next thing. When the big 2000 crash occurred on technology, everyone thought the world financially was going to crash. I don't know what version you're on with Apple, but I'm on like Apple 200 or something. I don't even know what it is anymore. Actually, I still have a 6. Some more fancy one. But we have evolved because we learned. We're like this whole artificial intelligence, but we're not artificial. Right. We learn from these events. Yeah. And as a society, we advance always, no matter how bad it was. And I think people have to understand that and not be afraid of that and take the risk that will make, in your mind, a little difference. That's what I do every day. And sometimes the risks don't pay off. Sometimes they do. And sometimes it gets other people moving forward.
Yeah. Preach it. I love it.
Yeah. I do. I have a philosophy. It's not complicated. It's, you wake up and you're breathing. It's a good day. You wake up and you're breathing and my wife and son are there. It's fantastic. The rest can all be fixed.
Yeah, man.
That's it. Well, listen, there's not much more to that.
I know. Yeah, I know. Honestly, and I'm going to kind of cap it at that, because that's as good as, that's perfect. One thing I'm doing with the show, just to kind of close each episode, is that the guest that comes on the show gets a chance to kind of leave a blessing with the audience, and whatever it is that you would, if you could see every one of them in a theater and you wanted to give them a parting thought.
Every day is another opportunity. That if you're feeling depressed or you're feeling like everything you're trying to do, you're not having impact, don't think of it that way. One of the greatest movies I love watching, I Got a Sign, It's a Wonderful Life. The impact people have is unmeasurable until later in life when you see it. And today, you may be thinking you're doing nothing or you're not doing enough, but actually you are. And you should take the step and step one more. Do things that are out of the box that you're not comfortable with, because that can help move this country forward. And don't be afraid. Failure that you may have is just what it is. You learn from it and you move on. But I would just encourage your listeners to not be afraid to take the step, to understand that moments in time are not fun at times like we're in now, but reality is there is opportunity, and that opportunity is on you to make it. And you should just do what you feel is right and do it and be positive about it, and don't let the negative stuff drag you down, because when it does, you won't get back up.
That's it, man.
Right.
Voyagers Podcast, piece of cake.
Yeah. All righty. Awesome, man.
Mark, thank you so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it, bro.
Absolutely, man. Enjoy the weather.
I will.
Okay.
All right. Catch you later. The Voyagers Podcast is produced by Sugar Sled Productions and recorded in Kula on the island of Maui. It's hosted by me, David Glenn Taylor. A huge thanks to Mark for taking the time to chat, and a special shout out to Claire, his incredible assistant who does a lot of heavy lifting with his schedule. And I think I can speak for Mark and Claire and myself when I say, vote. Mail your ballot, go to your poll, and vote. That's the easiest and most important way we can all be involved in our local and national politics. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It helps me grow the audience, send more light and love out to the universe. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor or in supporting this podcast, go to voyagerspodcast.com and click the link to become a Patreon supporter. And to become a sponsor, let's just start a conversation by email at david@voyagerspodcast.com. Next week, we're going to go from the political world to a world that is as far from politics as you can get. Have you been to Burning Man? If you're like me, you had only heard about it or seen some funky pictures on Instagram. And then I met one of the founders of Camp Mystic, A legendary gathering at Burning Man, and wow, what a crazy, amazing, beautiful story he tells. Filmmaker, artist, and mystic Jonathan Udis. That's next week on the Voyagers Podcast. Mahalo for listening, friends.